Hello and welcome everybody, I am one proud Bavarian. I am melting in this heat, and I will tell you that we are here with number 2 of the dev diaries for Victoria 3. This one is about capacities, and it is an interesting dev diary, because this is the one that essentially debates whether there is mana in Victoria 3. If you're not at all, confident what that term even means, we're going to explore that in this video. We're going to talk about it, we're going to talk about what I think about it, what the devs think about it, and maybe what you think about it, if you are so free as to go into the comments and tell me about it. Now, you can see that the screen is a bit more zoomed in, so that you can actually read the text a bit more easily, see the images more easily, etc, etc. Today we will be talking about 3 of the 4 of the main currencies of the game, namely capacities. The 4th one is money, and the other 3 are capacities. When we say that there is no mana in Victoria 3, we mean that the resources in Victoria 3 arise and are spent in clearly defined ways that are parts of the simulation, not from an overly abstract concept or vague idea. There is of course some degree of abstraction involved, all games are abstractions after all, but we want all the game's currencies to be strongly rooted in the mechanics and not feel arbitrary. So, what is mana? What does it even mean? They offer a definition here that essentially says it isn't too abstracted and it comes and goes within the system in a logical pattern. That is a definition that, as it stands, I can pretty much agree with. I think even in this definition there's still mana that I personally don't like, but let's work our way, into this definition. From the start, people often say that anything that is too abstracted or abstracted at all is essentially mana. Now, I disagree with that on principle, primarily because that would make, for example, gold or prestige or piety by definition mana, because all of those in CK3 are things that aren't actually things. Nobody has a counter that says I have 5,000 prestige. It is clearly an abstracted resource of recognition and so on and so forth. The gold in CK3 isn't the literal gold that is in your treasury, because you have to consider that what this gold sort of abstracts is the fact that you go around, you got some farms there, you got some stuff going on there, you put it into your silos, you make it so that you have this property, and all of that is just summed up into this is my gold. So essentially, much of the actual economic cycle of the period in CK3 is abstracted into gold, and it works. Now, why does it work? And that is where I also agree with the second definition which they give here, which essentially is just the fact that if you have something that arises from the system, then you have something, that makes sense, that you can look at, that you can see where it comes from and why it comes from there. For example, gold comes, of course, from people that work, create value that you can then extract and take for yourself. You can also spend it in a meaningful way, making it, for example, so that the infrastructure of your province is better by investing into buildings, by building castles, and so on and so forth, by paying men-at-arms, etc, etc. Gold, in that sense, is exactly what they mean here as their no mana description, but I would like to go a little bit further, because I don't just think that it does need to be not too abstracted and it needs to show where it goes and where it comes from and make sense in the system. I also actually simply think that mana is what you can't influence. When you play a tabletop game, for example, you will sit there and your mage will continuously generate mana, and that is just something that happens. The explanation is, hey, it's magic, and that is also something, of course, that is a bit weird, but at the same time, the problem that I have, in particular with EU4, they changed it slightly in the recent years of development, but the monarch power is essentially something that you don't have all that much influence over. Your character, your leader in EU4, simply says, this is how much I generate. Then you got everything going on when it comes to the individuals that are your advisors, and those generate more mana, but there's no way of naturally building something that then truly impacts how your mana is. Of course, there are other factors there. I don't want to say that is not the case, but what I want to say is that my additional idea of mana is essentially that I can influence it in a meaningful and sensible way, right? One of the big criticisms, of course, of EU4 mana is also the fact that you will sit down and essentially say, hey, my bird mana, so my diplomatic mana, is for some reason responsible for everything going on in the navy. Does that make any sense? Well, I don't know. Of course, you can say it is abstracted, the bureaucracy of the navy and whatnot, but and the tradition, but at the same time, that's not really what comes to mind with bird mana, with the diplomacy mana, right? Now, whether Victoria 3's capacities meet the this isn't mana that they themselves set, and then where I added another, essentially restriction where I say it can't just be randomly generated, let's take a look at that. Let's read the dev diary. If you have a different definition, by the way, do let me know. For starters, calling them currencies is actually not accurate. Capacities are not pooled resources and are not accumulated or spent, but instead have a constant generation and a constant usage. Similar to, for example, administrative capacity in Stellaris. If you don't know what that is, it's essentially a soft border where you can administrate your realm. If you go over that, so if you have more planets, more, population, etc., etc., then you can administrate, then you will have some losses in resource gain. And you generally want to keep your usage from exceeding your generation. Each capacity represents one specific area of your nation's territory's ability to govern and is used solely for matters relating to that area. I think that is a very wise move. It makes it so that we aren't looking at diplomacy mana, for example, influencing what is going on with the Navy, but instead all of this hopefully is restricted to its own usage and to its own usage area. As mentioned, capacities are not accumulated, so it's not a currency again, so excess generation is not pooled, but instead there is an effect for each capacity which is positive if generation exceeds usage, and quite negative if usage exceeds generation. A country that incorporates territories left and right without expanding its bureaucratic core may quickly find itself mired in debt as tax collection collapses under the strain. Of course, that makes sense. We had a very similar mechanic. You could build up your bureaucracy basically by financing it, by, getting more bureaucrats with the focus in Victoria 2 that you can set there. It's a very similar mechanic, but this one is, I think, more dynamic. This one makes it so that you can't just keep growing, and even if you have an issue with, bureaucrats not in a certain state, your entire apparatus still works. No, of course, the apparatus of your bureaucracy would be under strain if you go on to take more land. Even then, the old lands that you already, have a lot of bureaucracy in would suffer from that, and if that is depicted, then that is indeed great. Let's take a look at this. Bureaucracy represents a nation's ability to govern, invest in, and collect taxes from its incorporated territory. It is produced by the government administration building, where many of a nation's bureaucrats will be employed. All of a nation's incorporated states use a base amount of bureaucracy, which increases with the size of their population, and further increased by each institution, such as education or police, more on those later, that a country has invested in. Overall, the purpose of bureaucracy is to ensure that there is a cost to ruling over, taxing, and providing for your population. Administrating China should not be cheap. So this is very easy to understand, I think. What we have right here is a deficit of 53 bureaucracy. So essentially we generate 250 bureaucracy. That comes from the base value just because, hey, if you are a state, then you have some degree of bureaucracy going on. And then 150 from the government administration in Svealand. So somebody built a building, somebody is paying the bureaucrats that work in that building, and then those bureaucrats are generating bureaucracy. Your total usage of minus 303 bureaucracy is due to 5 incorporated states, so this means the larger you are with incorporated states, the more you will have going on there. Then this is POPs, this is very similar to Stellaris, I would say. And then here we have a law enforcement that is quite weak, it seems, but education that is quite decent, because this is level 3, this is just level 1. And all in all, that means that we are inefficient in what we do. We can see here the result being 21.4% of tax waste. If you build just another building here for government administration, not in Svealand, then we will all of a sudden be over it, and I assume that this might make investment cheaper. I highly doubt that it gives you more taxes, because you can only get the, appropriate amount of taxes, but I do think that this is something that is quite interesting in how you want to play it. The thing about this is clearly not mana. It is very rooted in what is going on. It costs you money to bring this up by having buildings, etc., etc. So yeah, I would argue that this is definitely not mana. I will tell you that I'm not entirely certain. This is, of course, not currency either. This is essentially just a stretch goal that you can reach, that you can operate within, and if you build more buildings, then you can have a larger goal there. You can have a larger capacity there at the end of the day, which is why that is the name. But I will say that I am not too sure, because this only giving deficits or only giving negatives, of course, makes a lot of sense, but it also really, really makes it so that you basically have no other choice than to react in one way to it, which effectively is building more buildings. And whether that is all that interesting, I'm not entirely certain about that part, but I don't think every mechanic has to be interesting at the end of the day. It certainly isn't mana. Authority represents the head of state's personal power and ability to enact a change in the country through decree. It is generated from your laws. Generally, the more repressive and authoritarian the country, the more authority it will generate, and is used by a variety of actions, such as enacting decrees in specific states, interacting with interest groups, and promoting or banning certain types of goods. Overall, the purpose of authority is to create an interesting trade-off between more and less authoritarian societies. By shifting the distribution of power away from the pops into the hands of the ruler, your ability to rule by decree is increased, and vice versa. Now, the interesting thing here to me is how it works if you have a very democratic state, a very anarchist state, for example, right? I would like to see how that actually interacts with this mechanic, because it would mean that you need parliamentary majorities, which makes a lot of sense, which changes gameplay, and which is also something that, of course, was a part of Victoria 2. I don't really see the distinct difference here, except that it is now depicted in a direct way of saying we have authority or we don't have authority. What can we read from here? Let's take a look at this. 7.5% enactment rate, so this just happens faster because we have excess authority. Then right here we have the base value. We are an oligarchy. We have national supremacy and freedom of conscience, and then right of assembly. So that is actually interesting. We get more authority from the fact that we have a right of assembly. I guess that the further you get, maybe this is a restricted right of assembly, it's difficult to say because we can't actually tell, but maybe the further you get into assembly, the less big is this bonus, but it's still a bonus. And the further you are to restricting it, the further you are to restricting the freedom of press, for example, the bigger this number is. That is the only way that I can explain it. It's interesting that this is still positive, but I guess it's just a numbers issue anyway. None of the numbers are final at the end of the day anyway. Plus 10% from ruler trade, experienced political operator. Your total usage of authority is due to consumption taxes, so this is a consumption tax just on liquor. Then we have road maintenance and road maintenance as well. At that point, I will say, it's a bit, to me personally, it feels a bit like this walks the line, essentially. I don't think authority is a bad mechanic. I think it is interesting. You don't need parliamentary, supremacy. I mean, you don't need anything, really, to, as an absolute ruler, say, hey, this is our new law. And the more authority you have, the easier that is. It makes a lot of sense. Other than that, you could always use your parliament to pass it if you were democratic, for example. But saying that my authority goes down because I maintain a road... And it's quite sizable. This is a larger impact than liquor in the consumption taxes. I'm honestly not that sure. I was assuming that road maintenance basically and exclusively was financed by me actually having the goods to maintain the road. For example, by saying, hey, do we have enough horses? Whatever is required to... I mean, a normal road doesn't really do much, but, any road that is, for example, a stone road or that isn't just a dirt road will require you to have actual maintenance. Having this in authority it feels kind of weird to me. Let me know what you think. I think this one is completely unproblematic. What we can see here is pure bureaucracy, and it also influences your pops, because of course you pay them to be bureaucrats. But down here it's just like, why do I need authority to have people do maintenance for my roads? Isn't that even just a bureaucracy issue, where you have just a bureaucracy that maintains your roads, for example? I don't know how I feel about this one. It feels a bit random in here. Feels a bit like ships in diplomacy points, but hey, honestly, it's not that bad yet. At least this is not something that I'm too upset about, but it's certainly confusing to me. Influence represents a country's ability to conduct diplomacy and its reach on the global stage. It is generated primarily from your rank. Great powers have more influence than major powers and so on, and is used to support ongoing diplomatic actions and pacts such as improving relations, alliances, trade deals, subjects, and so on. Overall, the purpose of influence is to force players to make interesting choices about which foreign countries they want to build strong diplomatic relationships with. I like this base idea. Let's take a look at it. So, effects from 100% or more excess influence, so you can see that we're literally 100% higher, much higher even. We get threat decay plus 50%. That is very nice. If you are very influential, it makes a lot of sense to say, hey, I'm very influential, and I can talk to everybody and essentially, sort of get rid of all the issues that we have. We can talk it through, we can have a propaganda campaign, etc., etc. I think this does make sense. This is a nice bonus. I definitely like this one the best out of all the bonuses that I have so far seen. Then down here we have the base value. We have the minor power gets 500. We have 200 from ruler trait ambitious, and 10% from landowners, so an interest group that directly is giving us capacity here. I think that's quite nice. It certainly should enable different playstyles. If we are in a position where we have different influence interest groups that are, influencing us, and I think we are in a position, of course, where that should also give us some benefit here. So this for influence is quite nice. This is Sweden, as discussed in the images above. Minus 50 for a personal union with Norway, and minus 300 for improved relations with Prussia. That is quite interesting. It certainly makes it so that personal unions are apparently very easy to maintain, because effectively what we're looking at is just, not improving relationships. Just having Norway as a personal union is only a minus 50. Sweden certainly has a lot of opportunities here that they could take care of, but maybe you don't even want more allies, because maybe you're in a position where you want the threat decay, because you just, I don't know, conquered Denmark, conquered Estonia, etc., etc. I am also basically okay with this one. This being a capacity, I mean, the thing about capacities, so let's just come to a conclusion here. I don't think any of these are truly mana. I don't think any of these are truly what EU4 does, in my opinion, wrong. EU4 is a great game if you like board games. I don't really like board games. I don't think this is what we have in front of us here when it comes to, is this a board game, yes or no? Is there mana, yes or no? This is more immersive. This is very much included in the systems, and not having a resource that amasses, but instead having a resource that you simply have to balance. I think that is also nice. I think this one makes a lot of sense. Everything here is fine, especially what costs what looks very good to me. Still a bit, feeling a bit weird about road maintenance, and when it comes to this, I mean, it's all balancing, of course, but I do think that everything that we can see in here also belongs into this category, meaning that, for example, the ruler trait or the landowner influence or the personal union, the improved relations, none of this feels unnatural, like diplomacy power influencing boats, but, let's not worry about that too much. I think that is quite interesting. I think there is a lot of potential in these systems, because one of the major criticisms, and this is a side effect of mana in my opinion, one of the major criticisms for mana is that if it amasses itself, you basically are just waiting. You're just sitting there and you say to yourself, I need to wait until I have X mana so that I can purchase this or that good. Since these are capacities, you don't have to worry about that. This is a much more fluid game. I personally like it. I do think that the, general understanding of what they think is mana and what isn't mana isn't incorrect. I just think that us being able to actually influence how we get the mana is something that is very satisfying, and that should always be a part of it, much like we can influence how much gold, prestige, or piety we make in CK3, for example. Right here, yeah, we went through this. I think, again, my only major gripe really with this dev diary is road maintenance. Beyond that, I think that these are sensible abstractions that don't go too far and don't really, are worthless either. I think they all have a pretty good level of influence. Now, the next one, that's all for today. Join us again next week as I cover something, yet another topic that's fundamental to Victoria 3. I can't read anymore. Buildings. I'm very excited to find out how exactly buildings work, because there were a lot of numbers of, like, buildings with level 10, for example, in many of the screenshots that we saw. I think that is a topic that we should learn more about, because honestly, I hope it's not too spammy, but I hope that it is incredibly influential, because buildings are our direct connection of investment to pops. And the pops are the key to all of this. So yeah, with that being said, I would like to thank all of you for watching. Please do leave a comment if you're interested, if you got anything to say. And with that being said, I would like to thank the members of the channel, the Counts, the Barons, and the Dukes. I messed that order up. Don't worry about it. Love you all, and see you later. Alligator.